This is the eLearning Podcast, episode number 71.
We were doing some research and machine learning development of algorithms within our educational technology and really starting to learn about where bias can creep into those processes, and then expanding that to be very, very intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion within OpenStax and within our products.
Welcome to the eLearning Podcast. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from lmspulse.com. Now, you may think it hyperbole if I told you that the fate of open educational resources lies on the shoulders of today's guest, but it's kind of true. Katherine Fletcher is the Director of Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics, that is F.A.T.E, at OpenStax. She's our second guest for one of the most important organizations for the advocacy of open educational resources, or OER. And this time around, we dig deeper into the relationship between free quality education content for everyone and the importance of things like ethics and transparency in our industry. In this very fateful conversation, Katherine and I talk about why the events sparked by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis led to a series of conversations on justice and inclusiveness that cascaded into OpenStax and ultimately sparked a new leadership role for the OER powerhouse. We also talk about the importance of having clear equity and diversity goals in your e-learning products and technology, because you might end up unintentionally sending the wrong message if you don't have them. Katherine also walks us through OpenStax's own process for power and accountability, and why small actions like taking an equity pause in the middle of a product meeting can make a huge amount of difference. And then finally, we talk about why, especially in education and humanitarian subjects, it's more important than ever to measure what matters, and why organizations should be brave enough to introduce OKRs that have emotions at their core. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And OpenLMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hello, Kathy. Welcome to the eLearning Podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you. Everything's fantastic down here in the city of Mexico. Where do we find you sitting today?
I am sitting in Houston, Texas, in my home, because we are working remotely, as there are many.
Houston, Texas. Fantastic. I've already teed you up in the introduction to this episode. Told everybody about all of the wonderful work that you do over there at OpenStax. But why don't you give us the 30 seconds of who is Kathy Fletcher and what is it that you're working on right now?
Okay, so my background is actually computer science and engineering, and I did a lot of product development and technology work within OpenStax. But for the last year and a half, I have a new fancy title, the Director of Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics. And that comes out of really learning. We were doing some research and machine learning development of algorithms within our educational technology, and really starting to learn about where bias can creep into those processes, and then expanding that to be very, very intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion within OpenStax and within our products. Especially in this last year, we've devoted lots of energy there, and we continue to devote that energy because it's critical to our mission.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it's you're like redesigning the ship, which is fantastic. I'm excited to learn about it. One more question before we dive in. I've been using the podcast as a time capsule about how the pandemic is going. And so you're sitting in Houston, Texas. We're recording this the bottom half of October in 2021. What's the situation like there?
What's the situation like here? We are just starting to come down in numbers. We had a brief lull in June where, we all went out and danced in the streets and felt like maybe we were coming to the end of things. that was a mistake, of course. And then Texas was leading the way with the Delta variant, and things have shut down a bit since then. And we're just starting, the numbers are starting to come back, and we're all much more humble.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for sharing. And here's hoping that we'll all find our way out of this. Before we talk specifically about what your position entails, and I'm really intrigued about this machine learning, piece and sort of the AI in the background that you were using. But just kind of give us an overview. OpenStax, like for anybody who's listening right now who's never heard of this program before or hasn't used your open resources, give us the the overview of what is this program, what is this mission, and what do you guys do?
Okay, so our mission is to make it possible for students to access and learn anything. So that's the big global mission. What we do is that we have a library of over 40 open, high quality, professionally produced textbooks, mostly at the college level, some at the advanced placement high school level. And we also build lots of learning resources that go with those textbooks, and we build some technology to like a reading experience and courseware. So those are areas that OpenStax also influences student learning.
And give us a sense of how broad and deep and wide does this program reach? I know we've had other guests on the show that have kind of said this, but again, just for anybody who's listening for the first time, like how long has it been around and how many people do you touch?
In various forms. We're actually coming up on a 20-year anniversary. In the real thrust of OpenStax as being a high quality educational publisher that builds resources around those open content, that's about a 10-year project, or 10 years so far. Those 40 textbooks touch 5 million students a year at this point. So it's really, and it's saved in the billions. I've lost track. I'm not, despite being an engineer and techie person, I'm not a numbers person necessarily anyway, but billions of dollars over this course of this program have been saved by students. And now we're really looking at, we want to do more than that. We want to be influencing student learning and students' conception of themselves as being able to have unlimited possibilities.
Wow. But I mean, fantastic mission. So take me into how you, maybe this is how like the genesis of your role, or I'm not sure how this ultimately came out, but you were saying that you were running some experiments. You were learning about your learners. You were learning about the material you put out there. Walk me through that story. Like, was this sort of an innocent, we're going to ask some questions and then we made some unusual discoveries, or was this very intentional, like to learn about equity and inclusion, those kinds of things, or what?
Well, so as part of that mission to help students learn anything they want to learn, in the courseware that we've built, we were using, our background in technology and machine learning and artificial intelligence, which really comes from our founder, Rich Baranek, who I think you're going to talk to also. Using that to understand where students are in their learning and predict what will be the most valuable thing for them to do next. So that's one of the places where we were designing practice space, what's called spaced practice algorithms. Like, it's better to learn over time than to try to cram right before a test, even though cramming right before a test is fairly effective for the grade on that test. It's not effective for long-term retention. So we were building those kinds of algorithms. We were building algorithms that look at what students are typing in and inputting and help to encourage them if they don't seem to be trying very hard, to just give them that nudge past, and then looking at which of those was most effective. And so you can think about that from user experience, and you can also think about that from learning models for students and building that. So as part of that, because I was directing the technology portion of that, and working with our research team, working with our developers, working with our product managers, I started looking at the emerging field of fairness and accountability in algorithms. And just learning a lot about, and I'm sure people have heard in the news about the ways that algorithms can be biased in facial recognition, in policing, in healthcare. And so we were really thinking, oh, let's get ahead of this. This is a place we could really be, we could do a really good job of it. We could use our foundation as part of Rice University to build in the best processes and make sure our data sets and our representation is unbiased in the way we develop these algorithms.
Take me through the history of that right there. Like, I mean, I think that the conversation going on right now, especially at least in the Western world, around inequities and, you know, balancing the scale here is fairly robust right now. But for those who are listening in other parts of the world, talk to me about what's been the discovery about inequity in education, and how has it evolved, and how has it kind of come to a head right now in this point in time?
I think that's a really good direction to go, because while I was looking at, in a way, very narrowly looking at the algorithms that we were producing, it's actually a much bigger environment that in which students are learning, and there's a history of inequity that's longstanding. So, you know, you come from schools that were segregated up until the 1950s and 60s to, you know, neighborhoods continuing to be segregated, and that affecting the funding and the resources that are available to students in their schools. So you set upon that, then students coming in and using technology and using textbooks, and are they finding themselves in those? That, you know, that's one of the things that you talked with Anthony about. Do they actually see themselves represented in both the histories and the careers that are set out in the books that we're showing them and the content that we're showing them? So that's some of the kind of history coming onto that. So that's one of the reasons why OpenStax in this last year, with the murder of George Floyd, really took a step back and thought, this is a bigger issue than just narrowly looking at our algorithms. It's really looking at our organization and how we do things, and whether we are diverse, are we inclusive, are we equitable within the organization? And then what are the ways in which we need to be much more intentional about looking at our products? Do we know who our students are? Do we really understand them? Do we understand where they're coming from? Do we understand what the learning outcomes are for them when they're using our resources, when they're using our tools? And then kind of beyond that, what about the whole field of educational publishing and technology? And, you know, who's doing the best work in this area? And can we learn together and do a better job for students?
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds overwhelming, you know, especially when you're looking at a library of, this is like any content creator out there, whether it's a professor, a teacher, or, you know, someone who's building content for a company or those kinds of things. This is one of the most daunting tasks, right? I've built something, I've built a course, I've built a text or something like that, and now I've got to go revise it. And now for you, we're talking about like a giant library of information.
Yeah.
How did you approach taking decisions about how to review the materials that you have and the technology and the open education resources that you use? And then, like, what's the process that that you use in order to sort of go through it, you know, step by step, and you know, come out with a better product that addresses things more equitably?
Okay. So first, just kind of starting out, like, I do think we're beginners and we're learning together. So I wouldn't in any way say that OpenStax or me, or we now have a team, a little team that's working together on this. None of us are experts, but we are learning a lot. How do we go about this? I'm going to refer people back to Anthony's talk on really looking at the content, those 40 books, because you're right. We are not ourselves going to go through all those 40 books. For one thing, we're not experts in all those fields. So we're not experts in chemistry, physics, psychology, economics, business, humanities, etc. So what Anthony did was build partnerships. He built partnerships with organizations that were both expert in a particular field and thinking intentionally about that field and the ways in which the knowledge in that field is disseminated, and is it done that, and what knowledge is included. So that's the diversity, the inclusion, and equity for each of those. And I think that they've been really successful in that. And I've been thinking a lot about partnership, that it's really critical to make good progress in areas of diversity, inclusion, and equity, is to really partner up. But I'm going to refer people there because he talks quite extensively about that process. What OpenStax did as an organization, one, we realized we needed a lot more knowledge, and we needed more expertise, and we needed help. And so I used some of my background as just a leader and mentor to think about what do we want to do internally as an organization, and what would be the first step. And so the first thing that we did was create an elected diversity, equity, and inclusion committee within our organization. And the idea there was that if they're elected, they're trusted. And trust is so fundamental to this work, to really believe that they're trusted. And then they have to have a certain amount of power. So they are entrusted to prioritize the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then evaluate it. So that's the accountability piece. But we've worked really hard to say it's everybody's work. So every single person at OpenStax should be thinking, oh, this is part of my job, and I really need to look at the processes we're using, and are they equitable? Are we really including the ideas of everybody on our team? Who is, if it's our students and faculty, who are we talking to? Who are we testing with? Who are we getting ideas from? How are we understanding what their barriers are? So that was one of the steps we took. And another step that we took was to bring in a set of advisors from the outside. So we have a DEI advisory committee that is external people. And the nice thing is those 40 textbooks, there's a lot of authors within there. There's a lot of faculty that really care deeply and have research in this area. We had a faculty member who does HR work and who has been working on human resources and how to do that equitably and fairly. So he joined our committee, and because they're using the materials and are a part of it, they said yes, even though, people have been very busy and very, anyway, so they've been helping us and, keeping us accountable, looking at what we're doing and saying, oh, I don't think that'll be effective. Here's something you need to do that you weren't thinking about doing. So those were two of the kind of ways that we broke this down, is to say, we're going to first build some power for people. We're going to get some new voices in that we weren't maybe hearing as well. And then over this last year, we did come up with a set of priorities to work on. And that's been part of the part that's been humbling. You just really have it's a lot to do, to think about, okay, we're going to analyze everything. We're going to figure out where our gaps are. We're going to reduce those gaps. And, that all takes work.
For sure.
Figure out
100%. And that's kind of was this topic within OpenStax, was it, just generally accepted by everybody who works in the organization and sort of your partners and whatnot? Like, this is just kind of like, okay, yeah, this time has come, or, I'm not going to say anybody was resistant to it, but just kind of like, oh, really? Like, I didn't need another thing on my desk. I've seen that a lot, right? Where it's just like, I know this is the right thing, but it's like, oh, you just added another layer. Like, how is that addressed?
So I can think of 3 things that are really important for how that was addressed. First of all, it ties to our mission. Our mission is about access and, learning for all students. So people who work at OpenStax, we have a very high attachment to that mission. When you talk to people, why did you join OpenStax? The mission is very inspiring. So that helps a lot, because it's once you realize it, once you think about it, it's really clear that this work is absolutely fundamental to achieving that mission. So I think that helped. Another thing that was really important was that our managing director, Daniel Williamson, absolutely said, we have 2 priorities this year. One is to become an influential leader in DEI and education. And 2 is to increase the number of students who are interacting with our materials at OpenStax, so those are, very simple, very clear, and it's coming from the top. So when you're thinking about, am I adding something? It's more, oh, wow, this is the big mission. This is the work. It's going to be exciting. And then the final component is maybe the more humbling side, which is that it is very emotional work. There is so much going on in the world. So part of it is acknowledging that. And, with our committee members that are elected, it's a 1-year term. We've also said, hey, at the organization, you should really expect to be on this committee. That's like a part of your work. It's not required. Like if you really feel completely inept at it, or just, it's, of course you're going to, but we are trying to normalize that it's everybody's work. We want you to be a part of it. You're going to be, this is real work and it's really valued. And then with our committee, it's like, we know that not only are you putting time into this, and that has to be in your workday, we're not asking you to come in after to do this work, but this has a special toll. It has an extra toll. So there's got to be relaxation time. If you need to take time that's just decompressing from this very difficult work, that's normalized. We've really tried to normalize that and make it healthy for everyone at OpenStax to do this work and to feel like it. And it's been, the emotional tax is definitely there, but it's also been enriching. One of the people that was on last year's committee said it's one of the things that they value most in the work they've been doing at OpenStax, that they learned a ton for just being able to focus on it. So
do you find that committee members are kind of having aha moments all the time in this work? Like,
yeah.
Like, can you give us a couple of examples? Like, have you heard of any like specific examples of those aha moments?
I think the aha moments are like crossing, here's what Asian Americans are going through. And that might not be where you might have been thinking, oh, here's what women are going through, or here's what our Black employees are going through. But those aha moments are those commonalities in what people are going through. Going to a great training and thinking, oh yeah, now I actually feel like I know how I could be a more effective bystander ally for somebody. Those are some other things I've heard from people on the committee. And then maybe the aha moment of, oh wow, this is hard work and we're gonna have to keep at it.
Indeed. What about the actual, like the technology components that you implement as well? And I think for me, especially, I'm going to assume that many of the listeners right now, this is all based around content, right? And so how have you also looked at this in the technology products you're putting out? And in terms, I'm just thinking in terms of, if your mission is reaching all, like, what do you do for low bandwidth communities, or these, no device areas, or these kinds of things? Like, has that been a part of the conversation?
Definitely been a part of the conversation. And one of the things we've been working on is in thinking about feature prioritization. How do you make sure that you're really thinking about which students are going to benefit from this particular feature? So in thinking about something like low bandwidth, hey, what about offline versions of things? And how do we make sure that while we're trying to move, you can do a lot going online, there's also value in having the same exact content you have online be really easy to access offline, so that you're not disadvantaging somebody who's got that low bandwidth. And I know that, we think about that, like, which new feature do we build, and how do you build that in? And so there's a technique called an equity pause that our groups have been using, and the different teams.
Did you say pause or pulse?
Pause. So it's like, hey, we're in the middle of a meeting, we're doing a lot of planning, we're prioritizing this and that. It's like taking a pause and saying, whose voices have we heard from? Whose voices might be missing? Who, is there some data we might want to collect? And who's this going to benefit? So various teams have tried this out and found it really refreshing.
You
And
say that
maybe
could be like a really powerful moment
Mhm.
in any, I'm just in any large or small organization as well. Just sort of in any meeting moment where you're just like, okay, look, we're 25 minutes into this meeting, and this, we've put this on the agenda to everybody just take a deep breath, literally stand up, step back, and be like, who aren't we thinking about? Honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard of that technique. I'm sure it's been around for a while, but I can see that being super powerful. Mm. So what hasn't worked? Like, this is a initiative that has all of the machinations of doing good things. It's evolving your organization, it's evolving your materials, your technology, and these kinds of things. What are the hiccups? I mean, and I'm not necessarily like tragic, but like what are things, even comedic that like, well, obviously that feature didn't work, or this committee is going to take 3 times as long as we thought it was going to take. Like, are there, like, I love to hear about challenges and fails so that we can all learn from them.
Well, okay. So one thing that was a challenge is that, okay, we were using a technique called objectives and key results, OKRs. You'll see that in a lot of tech companies and probably other companies too. John Doerr, who is a Rice alum, has a book called Measure What Matters, about using those to capture what you really care about and measure it. So our committee came up with a set of objectives and key results, and they were very, very specific, and they hit everything. Like, they were pretty broad. Like, we're gonna close gaps in hiring, promotion, and retention. We're going to create a culture where everybody feels they belong, and we're going to increase authorship in our institutional partnerships. Those have both been very successful. And we're going to fix accessibility. We're going to do all that in 1 year. And the biggest, I think, learning is that the data collection and actually thinking about what do you value, what are you going to measure, how are you going to build that in, those things take quite a bit of time. They're going to pay off hugely. You're probably going to be, there's a lot of great research that as you start to do this work, your bottom line, if you're a for-profit company, or if you're, which would be money, or if you're a nonprofit like us, your bottom line and impact is going to increase if you do this work. So we know it's going to pay off, but you do have to really realize that that's real work, and it takes time, and you have to have the capacity within your organization to do that. So we've hired some new people. We hired a director of employee engagement, so that we have somebody whose team really is thinking about some of these issues. So committee's prioritizing, but we really have the kind of HR capacity to do the work. And for our product teams, it's about building that capacity to do user testing with a broader set of students and really prioritize understanding our students and build measurements of learning outcomes into their products and do that more intentionally.
It's really interesting when you think about this work is challenging, especially because it's iceberg work. It's working on the stuff that's below the surface that we all kind of take for granted or have been moving through, especially, people in my age category. I will not put you there as well. But they for almost 50 years now, it's just, you kind of do it, right? But then when you take that equity pause, it's really quite interesting. It's fantastic. You and I talked in the green room before we started, recording this conversation about how you now have the opportunity to share what you've learned.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd love for you to kind of walk us through about what it is that you're building. And again, some of these partnerships that you're talking about, you have this ginormous amount of partners that you're working with, especially in the tech space and whatnot. Could you walk us through, like, you're doing this work and now you're able to share it. So why don't you tell that story?
Yeah, we're trying to build ways that we're sharing on an ongoing basis, because it is going to be long-term work. So our marketing and communications group is thinking about how do we get the vision that we're working toward as a part of our whole website? How do we use more of our blogging to talk about this work that we're doing? So there's that side of like continual sharing and education. And then we have funding from the Gates Foundation to build an equity accelerator course for educational technology providers. And there are courses out there to help teachers and faculty build inclusive classrooms, but there's less that's focused specifically on educational technology. And educational technology is increasingly factoring into student learning and student lives, from more technology being used for assessment, technology being used for admissions, technology being used for all kinds of analytics that are being used to direct programs to students, to guide students in their career path, all of these things increasingly influencing their lives and their learning. And yet we don't have a lot that's really focused on how do we do that well, and how do we make sure that all of that is working for all students. And so we have a course that we're building. All of our partners will be able to take it, and 13 of them are taking it with us this first year, and we will continue that. And we do hope that even influence, that'll be available to the broader educational technology community after this first year that we work on it.
Okay, so now is kind of the draft year, put it together, and then it'll become publicly accessible after that, or?
Yeah, that's the intention, right? And part of it is learning about that background of inequity within education. Part of it is developing case studies, design case studies. You think about something like medical school or law school, you really work through case studies to figure out how you're going to do this work well. So we're going to develop case studies that are really about educational technology and educational design. We're very excited about that, and thinking about, I've been thinking a lot about how user experience, which is all about empathy and is about bringing the customer's voice into the product design, and then making sure what you've designed actually works. You can use that same kind of flow to do this equity work.
Fantastic. Kathy, you have given us a huge amount of your precious time today. Final question for you, I ask everybody on the show, is what are, it's someone in your role, what are you excited about, for the next 6 months, 12 months? Obviously, this course that you just talked about, is going to be something like that. But are there other pieces, maybe even outside of OpenStax, that you're really interested in? It could be a shiny new object. It could be a particular partner you're working with, or anything that you want to give a shout out to that you think would, be interesting for our audience.
I think my shout out is really to all of the people that are working with us on this work. Certainly, we're now on our second year of that DEI committee. So we now have 9 people who have served on or are serving on this committee, and our external advisors who've come to us with this work. So that's my big shout out. Things that I'm excited about working on is that we've realized that we really do need to paint that picture of the vision of where we're trying to get. We had a lot of specific ideas, but painting the picture of where we're heading, I think, is important, and making sure that it really is a shared value among everybody, and everybody feels like, oh yeah, this is my work. That I'm excited about. Definitely excited and maybe somewhat apprehensive at the same time about the ability to be influential in technology, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in education in particular. It feels like we have an opportunity and a moment where we could do this right and not be in the headlines all the time. So that's in the headlines in a bad way.
I was just going to say, I literally kind of want to leave it hanging there so that everybody can kind of say, what headlines will we be seeing OpenStax and Kathy in the future? Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to learning more about how OpenStax continues to push forward DEI in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time too, and the great questions.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.